Before we step into the blood-stained halls of history, let me ask you this. What if a single death could change the fate of the entire world? Tonight, we're going to uncover those deaths, assassinations, betrayals, tragedies that reshaped civilizations forever. And as we walk through these stories, do me one favor, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next tale of history's darkest turns. And tell me in the comments, which death do you think had the greatest impact on our world? Let's begin. With the night, a man's final breath ended a republic and birthed an empire. Julius Caesar, 44 BCE. Julius Caesar wasn't just another Roman general. He was ambition carved into flesh, a man who had risen from an ordinary patrician family into the most feared and adored leader of Rome. By sheer force of will, cunning politics, and unmatched military brilliance, he conquered Gaul, crushed rivals, and even dared to march his armies on Rome itself, something considered unthinkable. To the poor, he was a savior, distributing land, food, and citizenship. To the Senate, he was a threat. Caesar had already declared himself dictator for life, and in doing so, he challenged the very foundation of the Roman Republic, a system built on shared power, not on kings. The whispers grew. Rome would soon have a monarch again, and many senators vowed they would not let history repeat itself. It was the Ides of March, March 15th. Caesar entered the Senate chamber, unaware that more than 60 conspirators waited inside, daggers hidden beneath their robes. Among them was his close friend, Brutus. As Caesar took his seat, the senators surrounded him. At first, he thought it was routine business. Then the steel flashed, a dagger struck him, then another, and another. Caesar fought back, but the numbers overwhelmed him. He stumbled, and in one of history's most haunting moments, he turned and saw Brutus, the man he loved like a son, among the attackers. Et tu, Brute? Whether or not he spoke those words, the betrayal was real. Moments later, Caesar collapsed at the foot of a statue of Pompey, his old rival. He had been stabbed 23 times. The conspirators expected cheers. They believed Rome would celebrate the death of a would-be king. Instead, silence fell across the city. Then chaos. Caesar's loyal supporters rioted, and Mark Antony, his ally, turned public opinion against the assassins. Caesar's funeral became a fiery display of grief, with crowds swarming, burning, and demanding justice. The assassins, once hailed as defenders of the Republic, found themselves hunted, exiled, or killed. The irony? In trying to save the Republic, the conspirators destroyed it. Caesar's death ignited years of civil war. His adopted heir, Octavian, later Augustus, defeated his rivals and became the first emperor of Rome. The Republic ended. The empire was born. For centuries, Rome would dominate the known world, roads, language, law. Echoes of that empire still shape our lives today, all of it because one man fell beneath the knives of his peers on the Ides of March. That was Julius Caesar, a single assassination that killed a republic and gave birth to an empire. But what happens when the death isn't planned, when fate itself steals a man who had conquered the known world? For that, we must look to Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, 323 BCE. Alexander was no ordinary king. By the age of 30, he had carved an empire stretching from Greece to Egypt, Persia, and deep into India. He never lost a battle. His ambition was boundless. He wanted to unite the known world under one rule. His soldiers called him the son of Zeus. His enemies called him unstoppable. But for all his glory, Alexander was also restless, paranoid, and mortal. He drank heavily, pushed his armies mercilessly, and had no clear air. In 323 BCE, in the city of Babylon, Alexander suddenly fell ill after a night of feasting. Fever gripped him. He could barely move, barely speak. Over the next 12 days, he grew weaker until he could no longer lift his head. At just 32 years old, the greatest conqueror the world had ever seen was dead. Historians still debate the cause: poisoning, malaria, typhoid. But the truth remains: one of history's brightest flames burned out far too early. Panic sets in. Who would rule? Alexander had no legitimate heir. His generals, men who had fought beside him for years, divided the empire into fragments. Friendships dissolved into rivalry. Blood was spilled. Instead of one great empire, Alexander's death gave birth to several kingdoms: Egypt under the Ptolemies, Persia under the Seleucids, and others. These Hellenistic kingdoms spread Greek culture, art, and language across continents. Without Alexander's death, Rome might never have risen to power in the way it did centuries later. If Caesar's death ended a republic, and Alexander's death shattered an empire. The next figure shows us how one woman's execution became the spark that helped turn the tide of a 100-year war. Let's talk about Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc, 1431. A teenage peasant girl from Domremy, France, Joan claimed she heard divine voices urging her to save her country. Against all odds, she convinced the Dauphin, the French heir, to let her lead troops. And she did the unthinkable. She lifted the siege of Orléans and inspired a broken nation. To the French, she was a saint in the making. To the English, she was a dangerous witch. Captured in battle, Joan was sold to the English and put on trial for heresy. It was a sham trial designed to break her spirit. But she refused to deny her visions. In May 1431, at just 19 years old, Joan was led to the marketplace in Rouen. Bound to a stake, she was set on fire. Witnesses said she never cried out in pain. Instead, she called upon God until the flames consumed her. Her ashes were thrown into the Seine, so no relics could remain. The English expected France to collapse without her. Instead, her death turned her into a martyr. French soldiers shouted her name as they fought. Her burning became the very fire that fueled France's eventual victory in the 100 Years' War. 25 years later, the Church declared Joan innocent. Centuries later, she was canonized as a saint. Today, Joan of Arc is remembered not only as a national hero of France, but as a symbol of resistance, courage, and faith. Joan's death helped end a war. But our next story, the assassination of an Archduke, didn't end war. It unleashed the bloodiest conflict the world had ever seen. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, 1914, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Franz Ferdinand was not loved by everyone, but his death would ignite the world. In June 1914, he traveled to Sarajevo with his wife Sophie. Tensions were already high. Serbian nationalists wanted to strike at the empire. As the couple rode through the city in an open car, a young assassin named Gavrilo Princip stepped forward with a pistol. 2 shots rang out. Franz was hit in the neck, Sophie in the stomach. Within minutes, both were dead. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia. Alliances activated like dominoes. Germany backed Austria. Russia defended Serbia. France and Britain joined in. What began as one assassination spiraled into World War I. 4 years, millions dead. Empires collapsed. The Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, the map of Europe was redrawn, and from the ashes, new seeds of conflict were planted, seeds that would grow into World War II. If the death of an Archduke unleashed global war, the death of one American president would decide whether a nation could survive its own civil war. Abraham Lincoln, 1865. Born in a log cabin, Abraham Lincoln rose to lead a nation divided by slavery. His words at Gettysburg, his Emancipation Proclamation, and his resolve during the Civil War made him the very symbol of American unity. But with the war nearly won, Lincoln dreamed of healing the country. Not everyone agreed. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington. Actor John Wilkes Booth slipped into the presidential box. A single shot from a Derringer pistol rang out. The bullet entered the back of Lincoln's head. He died the next morning. The nation plunged into mourning. Crowds wept in the streets. But Booth believed he had freed the South. Instead, he had destroyed any chance of a gentle reconstruction. Without Lincoln's guiding hand, bitter divisions hardened. Slavery ended, but racial tensions festered for generations. Jim Crow laws, segregation, and civil rights struggles all stemmed in part from the absence of Lincoln's leadership in those fragile years. If Lincoln's death left a wound in America, our next death-changing history episodes will keep you wondering. Till then, don't forget subscribe and comment your thoughts.